Can you remember the last time you achieved a true no thoughts head empty state? I know I can't. Would you like to though? And could you like to? I'm Cindy John, a second year juggling physics, linguistics, and computer science who enjoys a bit of philosophizing on the side. I've always been spellbound by the ubiquitous nature of death, the fear of it rather, and how that overshadows the essence of our being and doing. And when something scares you, you naturally dive headfirst into it. So buckle up for a somewhat ghastly ride as we explore what true death is and whether we can truly wish that upon ourselves. Do be warned that this podcast contains content about death, obviously, suicide, and existential terrors. As is with any good philosophizing endeavor, let's first define our concepts. What is death? Here we must tease apart two different kinds of death. There's the regular physical kind, it's the moment when you flatline. Then there's the mysterious, lasting oblivion that we so often ponder and fear. The same stuff we were floating in before birth. Maybe it's better to call that non-existence. You can think of the first as a point demarcating the beginning of the second, which is a continuum. The first seems to be defined in secular and scientific settings, while the second takes on a religious flavor. In many belief systems, that space is filled with an eternal afterlife or reincarnation, so you're clearly not quite dead. Among the views I've encountered, the version of death closest to true oblivion is perhaps the one from the Yoga Sutra. As outlined in an article by Pfluger, is known as samadhi, or the extinction of the operations of awareness. This can occur on two levels, the individual and universal. Now, physical individual death is usually viewed as part of the cycle of life. You kick the bucket, become worm food, and leave space for the new generation. But even the seemingly endless physical cycle comes to an end. While there are numerous theories about how the universe will end, scientists mostly agree that it will. Is that a real death? We'll return to that question shortly. Either way, we're all going to die in some way, and that rattles our very core. I've always had an inkling that the terror of mortality is the driving force behind most of our behaviors and beliefs, and recently I came across a theory that gives a name to this idea. The terror management theory was first proposed by cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker, then legitimized by three psychology professors, Solomon, Greenberg, and Piskaczynski, who put it to test in the lab. In their book, The Worm at the Core, they point out that as humans gained self-awareness in their evolutionary journey, they also encountered its evil twin, the knowledge that they will die. What a curse it is to wake up to the greatest gift imaginable, but to also know that it is fated to be lost. Wait, then why aren't we paralyzed by this? Being the intelligent creatures we are, we found ways to convince ourselves that life goes on, either literally or symbolically. To do that, we establish concrete notions of selves and cultures, which the selves are a part of. But, as suggested by the modern catchphrase, they're all constructs, right? And so they need to be instantiated in some way. The best tool at our disposal is language. As a system of vocal signs, it allows us to talk about things that are not here, now, or real. In short, words create worlds. In fact, words can have literal powers of creation in some religions. For example, in Abrahamic traditions, the world was spoken into being. The Bible even said that, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in Jewish legends, the golem, a humanoid servant made of clay, is brought to life with the inscription of the holy name. And what can better combat the claws of death than its antithesis, the act of creation? In other words, language objectivates. It populates the world with objects and allows us to communicate with other subjective beings. It generates the everyday reality that we take to be granted. However, We're isolated in alternate states, such as dreams, and we're even more alone in death. Maybe that's why some religions market death as an eternal union with God. And even for those intermediary states, language falls short. How much feebler would it be in describing the true indescribable? Furthermore, in the Yoga Sutra, true death involves isolation of consciousness, or kaivalya. What's left in that state is the pure personalist core of the person, just consciousness itself without an object. In that case, we're truly alone, and that state is the furthest from our everyday life. Since that's where language is rooted, a distortion occurs when it's applied to other areas, like projecting a 3D shape to a 2D canvas. Then will we not be at the complete loss of words when standing face to face with the most absolute version of death? Even if we can't conceptualize this true death in words, the death with a small d is fearsome enough. Paradoxically, we sometimes choose to dance with it to mitigate the fear. Language allows us to do that to some extent, by giving us an avenue of picturing death. When you're able to describe something formless and mysterious, it becomes more manageable. It's like an exposure therapy of sorts. Maybe that's what I'm doing here. Quite meta, right? Then, in this scenario, are we truly wishing to die? Well, not quite. Let's break it down into cases. First, returning to the tale of golems, it might seem like they're capable of wishing death upon themselves. In one version of the story, they leave behind instructions for their own destruction, the removal of the holy name from their foreheads. But that's only happening because something has gone wrong. The golems have deviated from their original purpose as servants and spun out of control. And it's really them asking for their own deaths, and not the divine spirit or human creators guiding their actions. These issues of suffering and agency are also present in the case of suicide and euthanasia. In their book, Solomon and his co-authors posit that some suicidal people see death as a way of continuing life in a different form, free of their present suffering. It is also debatable whether people have full power over their actions in such altered mental states. Similarly, the goal of euthanasia is to alleviate physical ailment and suffering. Healthy people are not considered for euthanasia, nor would they typically want it. Another case is the phenomenon of psychogenic death, theorized by John Leach. This is when people die from the lack of hope to live. Ironically, this usually occurs when people feel that death is pending. It is almost another way to quench the fear of mortality, especially the aspect of the unknown. So it's also, in a way, a forced choice, not a true desire. Finally, returning to our discussion of the Yoga Sutra death, it also seems to be born out of the imperfection of our everyday existence, the entanglement of desires, the compounding of suffering through time. In this language, it inevitably reverses the roles of life and death, and presents samadhi as yet another form of life, an existence without nuisance. And so we've gone around the circle. Even the desire for true death is a desire for a strange new life. How can you desire the extinction of desires anyway? So maybe we just can't fully die. We can get asymptotically close to not, no, nada, but there's always something left. Pfluger portrays samadhi as a white screen that appears after you rid a computer of all its virus and shut it down. That light remains. And in some endings of the universe, everything collapses into a singularity, but a new universe was spawned. In others, matter breaks down into the smallest conceivable units and are pushed apart indefinitely by dark energy. But some matter and some motion always remain. Hold up, you might say. If something can come from nothing, like what happened during the Big Bang, then why can't everything go to nothing? Well, maybe these two scenarios aren't perfectly symmetric. Regardless of its origins, once something comes into being, it can't really be destroyed, like old problematic pictures of politicians on the internet or tracks in a tabletop Zen garden. In the Yoga Sutra, traces left by experiences, or samskaras, are always replaced by traces left by non-experience. The garden might have once been smooth, but it can be restored after the first pass of the tiny rake. You might also say, if nothing is truly dead, then is everything alive? That idea might give you the creeps, especially if you consider its implications for goblin-like learning machines. But that, along with other challenges, might have to wait for another discussion, perhaps a cheerier one. Well, did you find that comforting or frightening? Maybe at this point, you're convinced that death is a force larger than life. Well then, is there something larger than death? What's more terrifying than the terror of complete oblivion? What about the loss of meaning through a Sisyphus kind of curse? That'd probably also have to be another venture. For now, this brings our oxymoronic mortal journey to a close. I hope this doesn't keep you up at night. Although, as Edgar Allan Poe allegedly said, sleep, those little slices of death, how I loathe them.